Welcome to Recombination Nation. Today I am talking to a remarkable grower recommended by a previous guest, and it was a very good recommendation. Today I'm talking to Edmund Frost from Commonwealth Seed Growers, who is an extraordinary uh, what would you say, coordinator and crop breeder specializing in cucurbits. So we're going to dig into cucurbit breeding in particular today. But he is also living in an intentional community and bringing a whole bunch of other small seed producers and breeders together into a collective force to be reckoned with. So that's the main things that I wanted to say to introduce you, but I'm sure you have a more in-depth kind of take on who you are and how you ended up in this very unusual pursuit in life. So, Edmund, I'll throw over to you. Tell us a bit more about who you are.
All right, thanks for the introduction, Shane. So I live in Virginia, um, at a community called Twin Oaks. It's a long-standing secular intentional community. There's about 100 people that live here. Um, and most of my farming career has been here. I've been in the neighborhood here about 18, 19 years or so. Um, and part of that has been I've lived at couple collective houses nearby Twin Oaks, but mostly at Twin Oaks. And let's see, I've been focused on seed production this whole time. Um, but as you know, when I was about 4 or 5 years into the seed production stuff, I started really thinking more about um, working to find crops that do well here, especially well here, and just comparing what's out there and trying to find stuff that works especially well for us here in this region. Um, and then after that, I started making crosses and doing selections and have bred um, have bred several varieties, cucumbers, a melon, several squash varieties, and I um, I run a project also called Commonwealth Seed Growers, which is a retail seed company. Um, and what's a little bit different about us is that we grow all the seeds that we sell within our small network. Um, and the farmers in the network are all in the Southeast US, mostly Virginia, Tennessee, North Carolina. Um, and many of us are doing breeding work and research work.
And that is really remarkable because so many small seed catalogs today are just repackaging material that's produced from far away and never quite know exactly what you're going to get out of that. But to do that with locally selected and bred crops and to network that way is just such a remarkable thing to see. So we'll definitely get into that towards the end of the conversation. But let's
Great.
talk about breeding. And particularly cucurbits, because yeah, you seem to have a real affinity with them. First, before we jump into the nitty-gritty, do you do you know why you became so involved with cucurbit breeding? Have they always resonated with you, or was there some practical reason along the way that they became a major focus for you?
Yeah, there's several reasons, and one just is I love vining crops, I guess, and I was just drawn to them. Um, I was drawn to winter squash because I like that you can keep it for a long time, and eat it for a long time. Um, and beyond that, I just there was a real need for work on them, so that was the other thing that drew me. Um, there's a disease here called downy mildew that really badly impacts cucumbers and squash and melons, and I was having a lot of trouble finding crops that um, or finding varieties that would be successful in these conditions. And so I started looking into it and I realized that not a whole lot of work was going into it in this region. And I thought there's an opportunity for something um, interesting and useful for me to work on.
Would I be right in saying as well the nature of cucurbit plants and how they reproduce makes it more challenging for small scale home gardeners to do useful breeding with them? And like there's a lot of space per plant of many of these species. And because of how they outcross so readily. If you want to do breeding and selection, you need to grow a relatively large number of plants and select them carefully. And if you're only growing, a backyard's worth of pumpkins, that might only be 6 plants, and it's difficult to make genetic progress on that scale, unless you're extremely coordinated with your community. So, and what are your thoughts on that idea?
Yeah, that resonates. I think there are advantages and disadvantages to cucurbits in that way. They're pretty easy to hand pollinate, so that's definitely an advantage. Um, and you don't need huge populations like something like corn or cabbage. You need bigger populations um, for the breeding work. But yeah, like especially winter squash takes up a ton of space. So let's see. Yeah, I think you're right about that. But in a certain way, they are kind of um, easy to grow crops, easy to understand how to do the pollinations. And so if you're a homesteader with a quarter acre garden, I think you could definitely work with them.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I mean, the other thing, do you have any like core origin story memories around cucurbits that make you just love them on a different level, or is it all completely practical? Or is it, I like teasing out these kind of things to get to the person behind the project.
That's a great question, and I'm gonna need to think on that. Yeah, I know I don't remember eating a lot of winter squash um growing up, but when I first tried it as maybe a teenager, I really loved it, and I loved the fact that it's something that you can grow and then keep around for several months.
Yeah, that storability in crops is something that's, I think
I
it's been
think there's
lost in
also
breeding as well. Like a lot of the modern industrial pumpkins are very thin-skinned and they're designed to be
mm,
picked and shipped and consumed in a very short period of time.
yeah.
Mm.
There's also something about squash here in that um it's a native crop to the Americas, and I think that there's a native bee here that primarily pollinates squash, and it's been doing that for I don't know how long, hundreds or thousands of years. And there's something about that I think has drawn me to squash.
Interesting, interesting. Okay, well, let's zoom in on a couple of the major species that you're working on, and let's explore a little bit more about like how you sourced your genetic diversity and what selection you put it through, how you're handling the crossing and the breeding, all of those kind of nitty-gritties. So maybe start with winter squash, the cucurbita. I guess there'd be Maxima and Moschata for you, or do Moschatas come under a
Mhm.
different common name?
Machada.
Mm.
Yeah. Um, yeah, so Machada is the thing that I've worked with the most, or the species that I've worked with the most in terms of squash. So Machada covers butternut squashes and it also covers most tropical pumpkins. And it's my understanding that it's actually a fairly significant crop in a lot of tropical um, locations. And yeah, usually the tropical pumpkins are Machadas. Um, and Machada species in particular tends to do better in hot weather. It tends to have better disease and pest resistance. It's resistant to vine borer, which is like the whole species is more or less resistant to vine borer, which is a major problem for summer squash here, um, and a problem for Maxima and Peppo winter squashes. So Machadas just have sort of like a baseline advantage over the other species in terms of how well they do here.
Mm.
Um,
Would you say
and
they're probably the most genetically diverse of the pumpkin species?
I don't know.
Mm.
Um, yeah, I don't know. There's
Mm.
definitely a lot of phenotypic diversity in Peppo. It goes all the way from zucchini to pumpkins.
Yeah. And
But
you've got the wild populations, the remnant
right,
populations present too, that could potentially be carefully added into the mix. Whereas I don't think there is any wild machata truly wild.
right. I've heard there's there's Lundolenia. I don't know if I'm saying that right, which is I think a wild squash which can be crossed into machata pretty easily.
Hmm.
It's native to Central America.
Yeah, I know a couple of people working on interspecies crosses with that wild species. So it's
Oh wow.
yeah, there's interesting kind of outer edges of that crop complex.
Hmm.
So how do you source your an original genetic diversity to kind of kick off the whole breeding process?
Yeah, so um machadas machadas and specifically butternut squash um was the first thing that I started working with in terms of breeding. Um and so I hadn't at that point when I made my first cross, which I've ended up working with for quite a number of years, I hadn't actually looked at that much of what was out there. And so the cross was between Waltham butternut and Seminole pumpkin, which is a machata from Florida. Um,
I love
and
Seminole pumpkin. It has amazing vigor here in subtropical Australia.
yeah, yep. And so the goal there was to have something that looked like a butternut, um, and has a much smaller seed cavity than a Seminole, but grows like a Seminole,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of the vigor and the adaptability to heat, and pests
Mm,
and disease, especially disease. So downy mildew, the what I mentioned earlier, will just it'll just kill Waltham butternut vines, um, before they get to produce, or at least before they get to produce quality fruits. Um, maybe not, maybe it won't do that every year, but most years you won't get a crop here. And so my goal was to breed something that was a butternut that you could grow here without trouble. Um, and so it and that was 2011 when I made that cross. And again, I was kind of just getting started in breeding, and all I did was grow the butternut and the Seminole next to each other. And then the next year, I looked for ones that had obviously crossed,
mm,
and went from there. But since then, I've tried a whole lot more stuff, a lot of tropical pumpkins, um, from the Caribbean, from Brazil, um, from Asia, and have used those in some of my crosses. Um, I I have a an offshoot of the so there's the Waltham butternut cross the Seminole pumpkin, which I've named South Anna, and I've been selecting that for anyway since 2011.
mm.
Um, but maybe 6 or 7 years back, I started an offshoot of that where I crossed in a Chinese pumpkin, um, and I've named that variety Baker's Branch butternut. And uh, they're both butternuts. They just have a little bit of a different flavor. Um, and I'm doing selection on both branches of that.
Looking back to the original varieties that, excuse me, that contributed the most useful qualities, do you have any guidelines for like how to tune your instincts to spot a variety that's like, oh, that one's going to be really useful to a breeding program? Or is it kind of unpredictable? You just have to run with it and see where it leads.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Um, with the squashes, there's like there's a tropical material, and the problem that has a set of problems, or that tends to have a certain set of problems, and then there's like material from the north that tends to have another set of problems. Um, and so yeah, a lot of the concept has just been to like cross them and get something that have the best of both of those worlds. Um, and so it kind of depends what I'm looking for. Let's see. At this point, I'm not very interested in northern varieties, except like let's say at this point, if I wanted something that was um, shorter vine length and quicker to mature, um, that might be reasons that I would seek out more northern Machado varieties. And actually, um, I guess I kind of am doing that a little bit. There's a, let's see, I have this new cross that is, it's a Guatemalan pumpkin and a variety called Burpee's Butterbush. Um, and
I know
cross
that
that
one's
with something,
extremely bushy, very, very short vines.
yeah, short vine. And it's also very sweet. Um, it's not a good keeper. Um, and someone actually sent me that cross, and I'm sorry, I can't remember their name right now, but someone sent me the F1 of that cross, and I was impressed with it. And then I crossed it to a Brazilian variety, which is also kind of a bush type. It's called Mini Paulista, um, and so I'm working out of that one, and I I'm happy to have a little bit of the northern short season genetics in it, but that I'm happy to have um, the disease resistance from the Guatemalan pumpkin and the Brazilian squash. And the Brazilian one is kind of unusual um, that it's bush type as well. There's very little in terms of bush growth habit for machadas that I've been able to find. Are you aware of much bush type genetics for machadas?
Well, we have much less to play with here in Australia because we're so isolated now. But yeah, there's a bit of it around. I've got a friend in the cooler part of Australia who's been working with bushy butternuts, and I got some
Hmm.
amazing material from them to try playing around with up here. Well, that brings me to the next question. How do you manage the logistics of having so many different sub strains and populations of the one species on your farm? Have you moved more to controlled hand pollination or exclusion, and or do you leverage having other people in your growing network to do different crosses in other locations?
Yeah, kind of a combination of those things. So let's see, I have several isolations. I've, you know, blessed with some really great growing land. Um, the main parcel that I grow on is big enough that I can actually have actually three Machada isolations on it. And then I have another field that I rent that's a fourth isolation. So I'll
And I guess
actually,
isolation isn't yes or no. It's basically a tolerance. Like if you get a 1% pollen coming from a different strain, it's probably not the end of the world for you. You've got tolerances for having the occasional off-type plant.
yeah, it here's an example that relates to that is that the two butternuts I was talking about earlier that are related to each other that I've been working on, I put those a little bit closer than I would put um, you know, a tropical squash that didn't look like a butternut, for instance. So those tend to go, you know, 800 feet apart or something. Um, I think normally I'm, might want a little more than that and trees in between. Um, but so I have those isolations. Um, in one of the isolations, I just kind of grow a grab bag of different things, of different machadas. So that's where I'll trial new stuff and sort of try out new crosses and new populations that I want to work with, but I'm not as sure about them. So necess- I'm not I'm not committed to them enough to give them their whole big isolation, but um, I might be growing somewhere between 4 and 15 plants of some of these all together in a field. And then of course I have to either hand pollinate or do um, some other kind of isolation. I've done this year I'm doing all hand pollination in that plot. The previous 2 years I tried out some screen cage isolation with introduced bumblebees. Um, and I I definitely had some success with that, but um, maybe I was just ready to take a break from it. It the thing that I the first year it worked well, and the second year it was really, really hot when the bumblebees were getting shipped, and the first time they shipped them, they died in shipping, um and then the second time they shipped them, they survived, but they weren't that healthy and vigorous, and the pollination wasn't great, and I just felt bad about sort of what had happened to the bees. So I think that's part of the reason I'm maybe not going to be going down that route so much.
Mm.
And yeah, I also there's also other growers in our network who will do some of these grow outs and crops. Um, I tend to want to send more finished varieties to other growers, um, unless you know, because for the breeding, I kind of want to see it myself
Yeah.
and do the more complex work with it.
How many generations do you normally like to select after a wide cross between strains before you feel like it's stable enough to send to other people?
Yeah. So an interesting thing about running your own seed company, and especially uh, at this time when there's a lot of people interested in plant breeding and sort of interesting new things, is that um, it's possible to put things out there before they're finished, before before you've done enough selection to make it a variety. So, for instance, for the South Anna variety, the South Anna butternut, which is Seminole across to Waltham, I started selling it as a cross. I just called it Seminole cross to Waltham. I think it was in the third generation, and then I continued to select it, and maybe in the sixth or the seventh generation, maybe I gave it its own name,
Mm.
and that is interesting because it brings the customers along with the journey, and with the sort of um it, it makes people better able to understand that process.
Yeah, yeah.
um
Do
but at
do
the
you
same
do
time
you
I
suspect
feel a
that
little,
those oh
yeah.
sorry do you suspect those early crosses have extra genetic diversity in them that could allow them to adapt to different locations? Like when it's perfectly stabilized under your conditions, it's lost some of its flexibility to go to very different conditions. So there could be an advantage in spreading those early crosses before they've been too highly selected.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Um, we've started calling so we still do this, and we started calling it research samples. So
Hmm.
it's kind of like we're not promising that we're always going to have it, or that it's stable, but we want people to look at it and, maybe start working with it themselves and see what they can make out of it. Um, but that the South Anna butternut, I'm still selecting it. And it's been since 2011.
Mm.
Um, and it still needs work. So I'm a little bit of two minds on whether to release stuff early or whether to wait. But I think having this sort of research sample category is a good compromise because I can get stuff out there as a research sample, but then wait to give things a name and promote them in that way.
Do you find a lot of take up with that opportunity? Because I like the very early work of bringing diverse strains together, managing the crosses. A lot of home gardeners don't necessarily want to do all of that time-sensitive, fiddly work. But once you get the first cross, it's a lot easier. You're just growing out and looking for plants that are superior. It's a less involved process to begin that local selection.
Yeah, I'm not sure how much um when you put things out there, it's only not that big a percentage of people that write you back and give you feedback.
Mhm.
So I definitely do get feedback and back and forth with people who are doing that kind of stuff with the research samples. Um, and there's a fair amount of people that buy them. So yeah, I think there is interest.
Yeah, yeah, that's really great to hear. Oh, I wanted to ask as well if you have any plans for selecting the edible seed quality in the machadas. And is that like something that you do after you optimize the flesh and the storage and the vigor?
Yeah. So there's a variety that came to me as just Chinese tropical pumpkin. It's actually something that was in, um, I think it's been kicking around in Hawaii for a while, but that it had its origins are from Taiwan. Um, and it's a variety that I've been selecting and working with for a number of years, and that has very thin holes on the seeds, and I think is really good for the edible seeds. Um, so I definitely, we definitely let people know that, and I've made some crosses with with that and some other things with the seeds in mind. But I don't have it's kind of a work in progress.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Oh, it's just great to. I love eating the seeds of Seminole. They're a little bit tough, but extremely
Yeah.
tasty. So we should probably move on to a different species. Let me think. Should we look at watermelons or maybe like muskmelons next? And they would be good to maybe talk as a pair because their climactic preferences are kind of complementary. One's kind of more temperate and arid, and the other's more subtropical and humid to some
Hmm.
degree. How do they kind of play off against each other? Because I know you're working with both of them at your location.
Yeah. Let's see. I mean, I love that we have both and they kind of complement each other. They're just both things that people are excited to eat in the summer. Um, and I've done a lot more work with muskmelons than I have with watermelons in terms of the breeding. I've definitely looked at a lot of watermelons, but haven't done so much like combining and selection. But with the muskmelons, I I've done trialing and I found basically my two favorite varieties, and they're varieties that we offer. Um, one's trifecta and one is Edisto 47. Edisto 47 has great downy mildew resistance. Trifecta just has great uh, flavor and sweetness and is very aromatic. So I've been selecting those varieties for a number of years, or at least someone in our network has grown them um, for a lot of the years since I found them. And but I thought it would be a good idea to cross them together. Um, and muskmelons are harder to cross than squash and cucumbers because the female flowers have male parts to them, and also the take rate is low. Have you done much crosses with muskmelons?
I'm building up to it this year, so I'm really interested to hear any advice about like how do you actually do controlled crosses with muskmelons? I want to know all the details.
Yeah. Well, I actually can't help you. I figured out what cross I wanted and I asked someone else to do it.
Hmm, hmm.
Um, so they made the cross and sent it back to me, and then I've been selecting from that population um, since 20 since 2020.
Yep. Okay. It's all
Um,
right. It's at least good to know that I'm guessing you have to do some kind of emasculation on the female flowers before they have a
yeah,
chance to ripen. So I'll be crawling around in the dirt in a few months' time.
yeah, yeah. I've had it explained to me. You have to go out the evening before and take out the male parts and tape it back up. And um, some people use a plant growth hormone to increase take rate. But yeah, I'm not the person that knows. And but yeah, I'm super excited about this variety. We're selling it as a research sample still, just trifecta crossed to Edisto 47. But it's just, the goal is to get the best of both worlds with those two parents and more. And so we're selecting for um, great sweetness and flavor, small seed cavity, melons that don't split or rot in the field, nice netting. Let's see.
Do you,
Edisto 47 is a little long season, so
just to
kind of
speed it
not.
up a little. Yep.
Yeah.
Do you think there's
Um,
a huge potential, I hate to use the marketing speak, but product differentiation with the dreadful quality of like industrial cantaloupes and melons that they're kind of like cardboard. You see them in like corporate fruit platters. Nobody really wants to eat them because they just taste like nothing. Um, and that tradition of like how amazingly high quality melons can be has kind of been lost from general culture.
yeah, I definitely think there's potential. And what I would love to see is when I name the variety, y- I really want to introduce it and promote it because I think it's great. I'm going to wait at least another year, maybe two. Um, but then just really promote its qualities. And my hope is that market growers will grow it and bring it to market with the variety name, and that eventually customers will be like, well, I'm looking for such and such melon rather than just I'm looking for a melon.
Hmm.
And I think that has happened with the South Anna butternut. It does have really good flavor, and you know, some growers will bring it to market as South Anna butternut. Um, that's honey nut butternut is kind of like that. People bring it to market as honey nut. Um, so I think there's definitely potential there. And then, um, it's something that market farmers can sort of work with and figure out how to differentiate their operation, in, in various ways around that as well.
Well, it gives the customer another reason to go to the farmer's market or a CSA. You can get something completely different to what's on offer in the supermarket.
Yeah,
Mm. Oh, a
totally.
couple of questions. How do you name new varieties when they're ready to be named? Does it just kind of eventually like creep up on you, or do you sit down and do like a brainstorming session and try and force it out?
Yeah. So some of them are just seem clear and obvious, and then some of them take longer. And I ask for people's help, and um, I'll give you a couple examples. So the South Anna butternut, it's just named after the river that is very nearby here. Um, and I like it because it has the word South in it. It's a butternut bred for the South, and it's just the South branch of this small river. But I think it makes a good name for it because it includes that. And by South, I mean the Southeast U.S.
Hmm.
Um, and what else? So South Wind cucumber, um, is one that I bred, and I bred it for downy mildew resistance. And so the way downy mildew works is that it doesn't overwinter in our climate. It overwinters where it's warmer, but then it blows north on the wind every year. And so south wind is like, I think I say like this is named after the south wind that blows the downy mildew into your crops.
I love that.
uh,
I love that.
yeah.
We'll talk about cucumbers next. Well, actually, this is a general question for cucurbit breeding, and I noticed you mentioned in your really good website about tracing fruit back to plants, and I like because of the vining nature of the crops, you end up with fruit and vines all tangled among each other. So, how do you handle that issue of selection, trying to select for plant qualities rather than just the finished fruit at the end?
Yeah, that's an important, you know, thing to know about if you're doing cucurbit breeding. Um, I think it is a lot more powerful to select by the plant than just by the fruit, because then you're able to find the plants that have good yields, as well as good flavor, and just sort of look at them as a whole. Um, so there's a couple different ways I do it. One is that you can train each plant separately, and I tend to do that with cucumbers still, because they're not that hard to train, and just be able to record the yields and take notes about flavor. And um, also, if there's foliage disease, you can't really figure that out if the plants are intertwined. Um,
Do
so
you
it
ever
helps.
cull whole plants partway through the season before they have a chance to fruit?
Um, well, yeah, I I do. Um, yeah, but they may have already like contributed pollen before
Yeah,
I pull them.
yeah,
And it depends. Gosh, yeah, that is definitely a technique to use. But back to the being able to track the individual plants. With squash, I used to train them separately as well, but I've gone more into a vine tracing method, because I think that by training them separately, I think it kind of skewed. Like that's not the way that squash are used to growing, and I
mm,
think it was kind of skewing the selections a bit. I think it's important to do at certain stages, um, of the projects, but then I wanted selection where the vines were intertwining, and it's a pain, but it's not that bad. You can do it. That's what I want to tell people.
yeah,
Get a couple of marking flags, and um, it's it's doable to trace the fruits back to the plants. I mean, it takes a while, but I think it's actually on the whole probably less work than doing separately trained plants for squash.
yeah. That makes sense. Um, Now let's talk cucumbers because,
Mhm.
and this is a really fascinating crop because different strains are used in so many different ways. I think of all of the cucurbits, it probably has the most diverse, like, ways that you can use the final product. And I'm wondering how that has influenced your cucumber trialing and breeding work.
Yeah, let's see. I think that aware of, I'm probably not aware of many of the ways that they get used. Um, but what I've been focusing on is let's see. When I started, I was aware of, like, it was somewhat early on that I found slicing cucumbers that were resistant to downy mildew. Um, and but there wasn't a pickling cucumber. And so I definitely made a point of working for the pickling cucumber, because that just wasn't out there. But in the process, I also ended up with slicing cucumber lines that I selected, and um, I'm really happy with the slicer that I bred, the Southwind slicer, because it has thinner skin than your typical slicer. And I think it's just better eating. Um, I don't know. Did you have other, I know that in some places people let the cucumbers mature more, and then like more to like the stage of a melon, and then scoop out the seeds and cook it. But I don't know that much about that kind of thing.
Yeah. I was toying around with storage varieties of cucumbers because
Oh,
again,
wow.
I love that idea of a homegrown crop that you don't need to pick and like eat fresh all at once. You get overwhelmed with a huge flush of productivity for like market varieties.
Oh.
Whereas a home grower, if you can store the fruit and there's still reasonable quality, I was investigating for fermenting as well, but didn't quite figure out a method that worked for me.
Do you store them when they're at the stage when the seeds are mature in the
Yes,
cucumber?
yeah. And I was getting a few months of storage out of some of the varieties with
Oh,
like russet skin,
okay.
and
Yeah, I've grown
and I
some
was
of
finding the
varieties like
flesh was
that.
still quite nice to eat fresh after sitting around for like a month or two.
Yeah. Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Mm.
There's a variety I've worked with, um from India that is like that. I should make a point of trying out the storage. Yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting trade. If you could try and improve the fresh eating flesh quality after storage, because I think they're mostly used in like curries and stir fries in India and Southeast Asia. But yeah, if there's
Uh-huh.
more of a market for fresh ones here, there might be a really unusual trait there that you can combine together. But there's probably trade-offs. Like the more you leave something sitting around, the less appealing the fresh qualities are probably going to become.
Eventually, but yeah, that sounds like a really interesting angle for cucumbers.
Mm, mm.
So
Well,
great suggestion.
we, we've we've dived into the specific cucurbit breeding that you're doing. We should spend some time talking about your production systems, and I'm really interested about the intersection between breeding and selection and the opportunities that opens for reducing inputs. So, do you want to tell us a little bit about how you manage growing like on this scale and what strategies have you used to like try and reduce the inputs needed? And you might still be catering to more high input end growers. So just tell us how you do it.
Yeah, so um I think selecting in conditions that are similar to what the end user is going to be growing it is super important. Um, I think just being a regional seed project where I'm mostly aiming to sell to people in the region is I think that's a big part of it. A lot of the diseases that we focus on working with are things that maybe often aren't a problem in the Western U.S. Or in the northern U.S. So just being in the region is a big piece. Um, but then second, we grow without, with very little pest control inputs. Um, for the most part, no spray. I have messed around with I the last couple years I've been trying a pyrethrin spray for this squash beetle that we have. It's a yellow squash beetle. Um, and I'm not happy with it. I think I'm gonna go back to not doing that. I was just doing it when the plants were very small to try to get a jump on this beetle, but I I think it just I don't know, it doesn't I think it works better when you're creating an atmosphere that is conducive to beneficials. And um, so other things about inputs we use row cover on on very small squash in certain conditions, and I feel a little bit mixed about that. Like, um, I want to expose the squash or whatever cucurbit it is to selection pressure, um, but sometimes we'll get a flush of squash bugs that'll just uh, be too much for the crop. Um, but I've definitely moved into minimizing the use of row cover. So if I use it, I'm only going to use it for about 10 days. And um, I think I use it probably maybe a third of the time.
I'm guessing
Um,
when you're bringing in genetics from other parts of the world and first starting to breed it, using higher levels of inputs to kind of bridge the divide to give it an opportunity to get further along in the selection process rather than just being cut short is a kind of a balancing act.
yeah, a balancing act seems right because you can't, if the plants are just going to die before, or maybe you're looking for a certain trait that deals with a problem later in the season and you need to get it to that point.
Yeah.
Um, but I love the idea of I've started sowing a lot thicker. So I have a lot more plants to choose from in terms of you know, I'm thinking of cucurbits here, but there's a lot of insect pressure on the young plants, and um, I think just having a lot of plants there to choose from that can get through that stage is really helpful.
Mm. What about irrigation and weed competition management? What approaches do you use for that?
Yeah, so we use drip irrigation, and irrigate most of the things we grow. Um, and I still think that we see a lot of, I still think that we get pressure from dryness, even with the drip irrigation. So things that can handle dryness will do better. Um, and it's similar, it's like what you said. We want to give the plants difficult conditions, but we also want them to make it. Um, so it is kind of a balancing act. But the other thing is, let's see how to just being a farmer is such a difficult thing economically,
Mm.
um, that that I think that doing things that let's see, using practices that are going to make the crop succeed, um, are just extra important in that context, even if you don't necessarily envision those techniques as something that in the long term people should be doing. I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It's a balancing act, and we're building a bridge to a future which could be very different to the dominant, the extremely high input production systems that currently supply most of the supermarkets.
Yeah.
We're laying a different foundation, but you can't do that in one generation.
Yeah.
Mm.
And one of the big things to, you know, is just to cultivate your own survival as a farmer.
Yeah.
So that's just an important piece of it. And um, for weed control, we use tractor cultivation, but it's pretty small scale. We use an old farm cultivating tractor, and it's not very sophisticated.
Mm.
Uh, but between that and uh, hoeing and hand weeding is mostly what how we do weed control. Also, cover cropping. We use sorghum as a smother crop, and I think that really keeps the fields in good shape and lowers the weed pressure
Do you
the
notice
next
that
year.
when you're breeding cucurbits, that there's a variation in their ability to quickly dominate a space and outcompete the weeds? Like once they get to a certain point, some strains seem to be better at doing that.
Yeah, I definitely see that. One thing about cucurbits is they want to send vines out. They send a few vines out far, and that can make it difficult to do cultivation in rows. Um, so often what I'll end up doing is a little bit of training so I can still cultivate in the rows.
Mhm.
Um, like I'll train the vines that are the biggest kind of back up against the row so I can do like an extra cultivation. But pretty not too long after that, you just kind of have to let them do their thing. And um, yeah, there's this watermelon I've worked with from China called Chuche Red, and it is just a delicious, wonderful, very sweet watermelon. And it's small, about the size of a football, an American football, um, and but it has really terrible ability to smother weeds somehow. It has the plants just don't make a good canopy. So I've started planting them closer together, and that helps. But in a really wet year, it's difficult. And this year was really wet, and we had a lot of trouble with that one.
Mm. Yeah, it's definitely a challenge with vining crops that once they start to spread, particularly cucurbit vines, because they're so tender and juicy, that if you're doing any mechanical weeding in amongst them as they're establishing, it can be a bit tricky.
Yeah, the training system I think works pretty well, but it is some work to do that, and you do damage some of the vines. And there's definitely times when I'm wondering about going through for that last cultivation, and I'm just
Are
Not
you
sure if it's a
actually
good
are you
idea.
harming the plants more in the process than benefiting them with the
Yeah.
reduced competition? Yeah, absolutely. I feel your pain with that here. I'm in a similar climate where weeds can really, really get moving in the summer. Now I wanted to make sure we leave plenty of time to talk about networking and community. The last thing I thought to ask though, the varieties and the seeds that you are producing and sending out to home gardeners and market gardeners and various like scales of producers, what kind of reports do you get back about the vigor and the quality of the stuff you're producing versus more mainstream commercial seed?
Um, we get good reports. It's the majority of customers don't necessarily speak up and give us feedback, but we get a lot of good feedback. Um, the feedback that I'm most excited about is when I hear from market growers and farmers about how one of our varieties filled a niche that they just weren't able to fill before.
Mhm.
And I think that that is true of our downy mildew resistant cucumbers and our butternut. So I get a lot of good feedback about those. Um, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, okay, that's good. That's good. Okay, now let's talk about networks and probably start at the foundation. I am fascinated by intentional communities. So I'm renaming this podcast Recombination Nation because I want to focus on cultural experimentation as well as agricultural and biological experimentation. I think they're complementary uh, ingredients in building a successful future. And I would love to hear more about the community that you live as a part of and just your thoughts about the dynamics and how it's managed to work so well.
Yeah, so Twin Oaks is an income sharing community of about 100 people in Virginia, and it's been around for almost 60 years. It's kind of it's the largest, longest lived secular income sharing commune um, in the US. There's actually a fair amount of Christian communes, but this is kind of the largest of this type. And some amazing things about it. I've been able to get started farming and have access to startup money and land and tractors and resources. There's people here whose job it is to work on the tractors when they break. And so I, you know, haven't had to do that as much as some farmers have to do. And so, yeah, it's been a really helpful way to just, it's enabled me to farm and to be able to have the resources I need to do that. So, um, let's see what else.
Well, do you have any guesses about how it's managed to be so successful? I imagine it traces its roots back to the 1970s counterculture movement, and a lot of those attempts at building intentional communities fizzled out. Do you have any idea of the history of like how Twin Oaks managed to succeed where other attempts didn't?
Twin Oaks was, I think it started with a little bit more resources than so many of those places. It was also started by academics,
Hmm.
um, and it was a lot of the a lot of the founders and the early people that worked on it they were really into having um, really good organization and administration. So we have Twin Oaks has a whole labor system where the requirement to live at Twin Oaks is to work a certain number of hours every week, and you have to track your work and then record that, and it gets entered into a database. You can sort of like work extra and save up hours so you can go on vacation. Um, but there's just a whole system around that, and It's pretty interesting. I don't love having to track labor that closely, but there's some really neat things about it. One is that people can be uh, just relaxing and hanging out, and other people working hard on something nearby, and nobody's feeling guilty about it or um, upset about it because it's just sort of understood that everybody is working and contributing. I think that has been one of the things that's made it work. Um,
What about scale? You mentioned about 100 people. Do you think that's around about the right size? That if it's too small, it can become unstable and it doesn't have those economies of scale. And if it's too big, people kind of lose track of who everyone is.
yeah, I know that if it's too small, uh, I think living in small groups and collective houses is a great way to live, and I've done that also. But I think in terms of having something that's going to last and sustain itself, you need a little bit more critical mass. Um, and just like to be able to have culture and policies that sort of uh, move the whole thing along, you need a critical mass of people. And I don't know what number that would be, if it's 20 or 30 or more. Um, and then as for too large, I can't really speak to that. I haven't tried, to- you know, I haven't really been to communities like this that are larger.
Yeah, I'm not sure they exist. Maybe religious ones in some places can hold together on a bigger scale because
Right.
there's a different ingredient in the mix. Are there any thoughts or attempts at replicating the success of Twin Oaks in other locations? Have other communities tried to uh, tap into the model and learn from it?
Yeah. So we're part of a couple networks of communities in North America. There's the Fellowship of Intentional Communities, which actually Federation of anyway, Fellowship of Intentional Communities. They may have changed their name slightly, um, and and that includes communities that are more like co-housing, and it also includes communities like us, and it includes very small communities. Um, and I think Twin Oaks is an influential part of that. We're kind of like well established and big, and we host a communities conference here every year, and and people come from a lot of those other projects. Um, but it's been there's definitely been interest in like like it'd be great if other places wanted to do something like Twin Oaks, and um, it hasn't multiplied like that. There's a community in Missouri called Eastwind that was founded by some of the same people that founded Twin Oaks, and that has been pretty successful and similar in size to Twin Oaks. And there's another communities network called the Federation of Egalitarian Communities, and this is income sharing egalitarian communities, and that includes Eastwind and Twin Oaks. Um, and but we haven't really been able to sort of exponentially grow it for whatever reason.
Mm. What advice would you give to young people who are interested in like taking an independent crop breeding path in life but can't see a way to secure access to their own land? Um, what do you think about encouraging more of them to head in a similar path to you? What advice would you give?
Yeah, I mean, I think looking for collective opportunities, or just cooperative opportunities is what I would recommend. And I think there's a lot of ways to do that. Just to you don't have to own your own land to farm. I think that's the biggest advice I would give. Look for land to rent, or um, not even a lot of times. so I mentioned we have a couple different fields, and one of the fields, um, we don't actually pay a rent. The landowner is just happy to have something interesting happening on the land. And I've encountered that several times. So just yeah, you can start and sustain a farm without having your own land. You have to be a little more flexible. I've never really lived in the same, I've never lived next to the fields that I farm. It's always been a little ways away, driving, which is not ideal, but that's the opportunity that that I've that's been available, and it's worked in terms of being able to have access to land.
Excellent, excellent. That's a really good message to get out there because it's an option that's there, but I think a lot of people don't realize they just have one idea in their head about what success has to look like. Another thing I really want to talk about is the network of seed producers that you've brought together through the Commonwealth Seed Growers. Do you want to tell me a little bit more about the kind of process that led to it coming together and what it's been like managing that?
Yeah, so um, I was part of starting Commonwealth Seed Growers because I wanted something that was just exclusively stuff that was being grown in the region, and not sourced from somewhere else. And um, that was kind of the foundation of it. It's been let's see, I've been doing the project for a little over 10 years now, and it has there was definitely a period of years where I was sustaining it on my own for the most part. Um, but it has, in the last maybe 4 years, it has been growing slowly into you know getting our sales up to a place where we need uh more seed from other growers, um and there's just that opportunity there to you know for us to have money to pay other growers. And um let's see, I guess the main thing is that I've kind of been at the center of it, but I think that we're in a stage now where we're really bringing a handful of new people into it, or not new growers necessarily, but new participants. And I think it has a lot of potential. One of the things I'm really okay, one of the problems has been um, that I'm so focused on the research and the breeding. Um, it's hard to find people like that. It's often that people want to do, people are up for doing the seed production, but they don't want to mess around with all this other stuff.
Mm.
Um, and so finding partners who are interested in the research and the breeding has been difficult. But um, we've got Care of the Earth Farm in Tennessee that does a lot of that work, and they've been involved in the project for about 4 years. And Laughing Springs Farm in North Carolina, Jay Bost and Nora Rodley are experienced farmers and also trained in plant breeding, and they're starting to contribute. There's another farm in Ohio that's starting to get involved, and then there's more people sort of in our neighborhood that are interested and excited about doing the work. So it's um,
Have there been any opportunities to share, to specialize in different stages in crop breeding cycles? Because the early strain selection and crossing can be quite different to like the later stages of refining out a stable variety.
um, I think what has happened is that um, I've got all these projects that I developed, and I definitely send out grow outs related to those projects. there's a grower in Florida that I've been working with, which is great because he can grow them over the winter and then send them back and make things go faster. But I'm a little hesitant to send out um s- selection projects that need really intensive selection.
Yeah.
Um I would say I'm starting to do it more actually. But it just it can be more work than people expect and are up for. And I think the other piece is just like being able to fund that. For myself, I've kind of been able to, partly because of living communally, um, been able to do more experimentation and still get by. But other farms aren't necessarily up for that. But then the other answer to that is that we've just brought in other growers who have their own breeding projects, and so those varieties are coming into the project that are kind of like um, from different breeding pipelines,
Mm.
if that makes sense. It's mostly stuff that I've done, but then we've got um, a few of those other farms sending the stuff that they've been stewarding and selecting and breeding.
I mean, there are practical limits to how many breeding projects one grower can do on their own. You've only got like so many hours in the day, so much attention. And if you took all of those strains and put them in a catalog, it would be a really interesting catalog, but it would be a fairly small one. But I love what you're doing, that you're bringing like multiple people working on their own projects, and then it's a single point of contact for customers to look at one larger catalog, which is more likely to cover, more of their needs by like different varieties from different growers that are in the mix. It feels like a really useful model. Do you feel like the the customer base is rapidly changing, like becoming more aware of the advantages of locally grown and bred varieties?
I don't know. The customer, we grow every year, and I think it's because our crops do well for people, and that spreads word of mouth. I think that's a lot of it. You know, we've struggled to do adequate outreach or marketing, I think is another factor, but um I think that I'm really trying to get the message out that we're really producing the seeds and doing the research work, and that people should give that a chance, because most people don't understand that that's not the norm for seed production. So it is a little bit of or for seed companies. So it is a little bit of an uphill battle or struggle to be doing something that people think that seed companies are doing,
Mm.
and you have to explain that they're not doing that, but actually we're doing that. So that's a little bit difficult. That makes sense. But I think it's working slowly.
Well, that's what
Uh,
I'm hoping. Things like this podcast are getting out there and spreading the message about how important this is, and that it's actually being done, that there's people out there doing this work who need recognition and support. Oh, I had one little side question that I
Appreciate that.
thought to ask. Have you managed to leverage your community at Twin Oaks to help with the selection process? And I'm thinking particularly in terms of like eating qualities of storage pumpkins. Uh, like, do some of the crops that you grow end up feeding the community, and do you get an opportunity to like use those people's taste buds to help drive the selections?
So I definitely a lot of the crops do go to feed the community, and there's certain crops that you can get the seeds out and they're still good eating quality, and that includes winter squash, which is one of the reasons I've worked with it so much. Cantaloupes are like that too, and red peppers, or mature peppers. Um, I think economically that is one of the factors, also because it the food I'm growing is going to go to the community, um even if I'm not making um as much money on the seeds as it just it supplements it augments the economic value of the crop
Yeah.
to have this community that wants to eat it. Um, and I definitely um, get sort of general feedback, but I don't necessarily and I'll do tastings where I get other people's opinions, but I don't sort of do that in like I don't tend to do tastings where I have like
The entire
uh
community contributing.
dozens
Yeah.
of people tasting it, but I'll get a few people to come and sort of give their input and like double check sort of the things that I'm seeing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's really helpful.
Mm. Yeah, I definitely hear about breeders who get their taste buds oversaturated if they've got like 50
Yeah.
different varieties that they need to assess. Your brain gets a bit scrambled trying to process all that information sensorily. And
I had a tomato.
it's fun. It's fun to do it with other people.
Yeah. There was a tomato that I was selecting a few weeks ago, and I could not I couldn't make any sense of it. I'd eaten too many tomatoes, so I got someone I work with did all the tasting, and it was great.
Yeah, yeah. Now, another thing I noticed that you're doing successfully is tapping into some local grants to support the work that you're doing. Again, just adding to the economic puzzle of producing locally adapted seeds. Do you want to tell me a little bit about what that process has been like?
Yeah, so there's sustainable agriculture research and education grants. It's funded by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, but targeted towards small scale farmers doing sus sustainable ag approaches in various ways. Um, and I've gotten like four of those over the years. Um, and that has definitely helped get breeding projects started. And get research started. You know, the first one I did was just trialing. But I ended up finding parents for the cucumber and the melon projects that I'm doing, breeding projects. And so yeah, they've been very helpful. I think an important thing to remember about grants is don't get a grant to do something that you didn't want to do anyway.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but you know, I've been able to just come up with research and breeding concepts and propose them to the SARE program and have gotten a lot of support and funding through that. Um, there's another one that I got, Organic Farming Research Foundation, that helped with the cucumber project, and that was awesome. But their grants have become harder to get, so I'm I haven't kept trying to do that.
I correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm guessing it's the kind of thing where you have to be mindful about the amount of time you put into filling out all of the paperwork, like balancing the possibility that it's going to not be approved. So it's easy to overinvest and overstress about all of the little details. And if the idea is solid and you had a decent chance of getting it, you generally just have to get the paperwork in at a reasonable standard and leave it in the hands of the gods to a degree. And also that the cycle of this funding is kind of like a bonus to operations that just makes things easier. And it can't be something that is make or break that like you have to rely the whole operation on.
Yeah, I think that's right. But yeah, it's been great at getting some of these projects started, and I've been part of applications for bigger, more complicated grants that have tended to not be as successful. And uh, the SARE grants are actually designed to be a little bit more on the easy side in terms of administration and paperwork, but at least the ones that are for farmers. So that helps. And I think that there are grants out there that are pretty super complicated in terms of paperwork, and I haven't really been going for those.
Mm, mm. Now, I think we've covered all the major topics I wanted to dive into today. This has been an utterly fascinating talk, and I'm so glad I found you. Thanks to Richard Gowitz, recommended that I talk to you from the other community, Eastwind.
Yeah.
Final thing I always love wrapping up with, if you could wave a magic wand and create a new crop, a plausible crop, but something that would probably take your whole lifetime or several lifetimes, if you could just skip forward to the final product, what species would you work on and how would you want to transform it? And you can have multiple answers. I love this question.
Oh my gosh, I don't know. Uh, I I'm really interested in storage quality. So like if you could eat some of these summer vegetables for a much larger period of the year, like a cantaloupe that would store for months and you could eat it in January.
Are there
Um,
storage sweet watermelon varieties in the US? I'm sure I heard about them somewhere that they'll at least sit around for maybe a month or two without completely deteriorating.
yeah, I have tried to research that and I don't feel like I really was able to wrap my head around it. I would like to try that more for
Mm,
sure.
mm,
And there are muskmelons that keep better. I'd like to try that too. Let's
hmm.
see. What other crops?
What about any wild cucurbits that you think could be potentially domesticated with a bit of dedicated attention?
Um, we've started growing kiwano, which is a relative of cucumber and melon.
Hmm.
And that is actually a really good storage fruit. We've got a picture on our Instagram of kiwano with snow in the background that we took in February.
Oh, wow.
Um, I was pretty impressed with it. And they're delicious. They're mildly sweet. Um, it'd be cool if they were, breeding one that's sweeter, I think could be a really good project. Also, just a little better adapted. The the vines could be a little bit more disease resistant for our conditions, but they work. Um, and let's see, there's some. I've been experimenting with wild cucurbita pepo squashes lately, a little bit, just trying out a few, and I want to keep doing that. Just seeing if there's some of the resilience from those crops that I could bring into regular summer squash.
Yeah, yeah, excellent, excellent. I love that answer. Edmund, thank you so much for taking the time and coming to talk on the show. And I hope it's been as enjoyable for you as it was for me.
Yes, definitely was very interesting, and I would love to hear from people.
Oh, yes. Where can
Info,
people check out your work and follow up on your links and order seeds if they want to check out your material?
yeah, our website is commonwealthseeds.com and email is info@commonwealthseeds.com. So I would love to hear from people.
Yeah, and you have an amazing catalog with a whole lot of really detailed information about the work that you're doing. So I think even if people
Thank
were
you.
on the other side of the planet and couldn't order the seeds, they should still check out the work that you're doing.
I would love to be in touch with people and talk about seeds and regional seed growing and the struggles of seed production and the economics and plant breeding, everything.
Mm, brilliant, brilliant. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sign up to my Substack for a free weekly post straight to your inbox. And if you really want to support the show, get a paid subscription and that will unlock the archive of past posts. Next week, we talk to paleontologist Peter Ward about his rare earth hypothesis and a speculative history of the future of life on Earth.